The stars had always been cold and silent, but on that day in the year 2847, they screamed. Captain Elena Vasquez stood on the bridge of the colony transport ship Horizon's Promise, watching her instruments go insane. Red warning lights painted her face in shades of blood. Behind her, the bridge crew worked frantically at their stations, but she could hear the fear in their voices. They all knew what was happening. They all knew they were going to die. The Kepler collapse had come without warning. One moment, the Tau Ceti system was peaceful home to 80 million human souls spread across 3 habitable moons. The next moment, something deep in the fabric of space itself began to tear. A gravitational anomaly, the scientists called it. A wound in reality that was growing larger by the hour. The effect was simple and terrible. Everything in the system was being pulled toward the anomaly. Moons, ships, stations, people. The evacuation had begun immediately, but it was hopeless. Humanity's ships were too slow. Their technology was too primitive. They had only discovered faster than light travel 60 years ago, and they were still children playing with toys they did not understand. How long? Elena asked her navigator. The young man's hands were shaking. 12 hours. Maybe 14. Then the anomaly reaches critical mass, and everything within 2 light years gets crushed into nothing. 80 million people. Humanity's largest colony. Gone in less than a day. Elena closed her eyes. She had a daughter on the 3rd moon. A little girl named Sophia, who was only 7 years old. Sophia was probably scared right now. She was probably crying for her mother. And Elena could do nothing. She could not even reach her to say goodbye. The communications officer suddenly sat up straight. "Captain, we're receiving a signal. I don't recognize the language." Running it through the translator. A moment later, a voice filled the bridge. It was deep and resonant, like the sound of mountains speaking. The translator struggled with the words, but the meaning came through. Human vessels. This is High Anchor Velthan of the Vethrani Concordance. We have detected your distress. We are coming. Elena's heart jumped. The Vethrani. She had heard of them, everyone had. They were one of the oldest species in the galaxy, masters of gravitational physics, keepers of technologies that humanity could barely comprehend. But why would they help? Humanity was nothing to them. A minor species. A footnote in galactic history. How far away are they? She demanded. 3 hours at maximum speed. Too slow. Far too slow. The anomaly would consume the inner system long before they arrived. But then the navigator made a strange sound, something between a gasp and a laugh. "Captain, they're not coming at normal speed. I don't know what they're doing. They're bending space itself. They'll be here in 20 minutes. The Vethrani arrived like gods descending from heaven. 3 massive ships unlike anything humanity had ever seen. They were not built from metal and plastic like human vessels. They seemed to be made of solidified starlight, curves and angles that hurt the eyes to look upon. The humans later learned they were called anchor ships, sacred vessels that took the Vethrani centuries to build. Each one was considered priceless beyond measure. The Vethrani did not ask for permission. They did not negotiate. They simply went to work. Elena watched on her view screen as the 3 anchor ships positioned themselves around the anomaly. Light began to pour from their hulls, not ordinary light, but something that seemed to have weight and substance. The light wrapped around the wound in space like bandages around a bleeding cut. The process took 6 hours. 6 hours during which the Vethrani ships burned with increasing brightness. 6 hours during which the anomaly fought back, trying to consume everything around it. The human ships could do nothing but watch and pray to whatever gods they believed in. When it was over, The anomaly was gone. Sealed. Healed. The Tau Ceti system was safe. But the cost had been terrible. 2 of the 3 anchor ships had burned out completely. Their ancient systems, pushed beyond all limits, had simply died. The 3rd ship was barely functional. And the crews, the brave Vethrani who had operated them, had paid the highest price of all. 347 Vethrani had given their lives. They had burned themselves out alongside their ships, pouring their own life energy into the sealing process. Captain Elena Vasquez was among the first humans to board the surviving Vethrani ship. She walked through corridors of crystallized light and found High Anchor Velthan, sitting alone in what seemed to be a meditation chamber. The ancient being looked exhausted beyond words. His skin, normally a deep blue, had faded to gray. His eyes, which should have glowed with inner light, were dim. Elena fell to her knees before him. She did not know what else to do. "Why?" she asked. Her voice was broken. "We are nothing to you. We have nothing to offer you. Why did you sacrifice so much for us?" Velthan looked at her for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. "Because you were dying," he said simply. "Because we could help. Because that is what civilized beings do." He asked for nothing in return. No payment. No political favors. No treaties or alliances. The Vethrani simply left, taking their dead and their broken ships with them. To them, it was merely the right thing to do, a moment of kindness in an uncaring universe. But humanity did not forget. 1 month later, Earth's Unified Council held a special session. Every nation, every colony, every human settlement in the galaxy was represented. They voted unanimously to pass the Vethrani Remembrance Act. The names of all 347 Vethrani who died were inscribed on monuments built on every human world. Their images were placed in every school. Every human child, from that day forward, would learn their story. The debt was not symbolic. It was not diplomatic courtesy. It was written into the very foundation of human law. Elena Vasquez, who would later become the first human ambassador to the Vethrani, stood before the council and spoke the words that would echo through human history. They saved us when we were weak. They asked for nothing when they could have asked for everything. They gave us tomorrow when we had nothing but death. We will remember. We will always remember. And one day, no matter how long it takes, we will repay them. The galaxy did not understand. Debts were political tools, easily forgotten when convenient. But humans were different. They remembered. They always remembered. And 300 years later, the galaxy would learn what that memory truly meant. 300 years was a long time for humans. Empires rose and fell. Technologies advanced beyond recognition. The children of Tau Ceti had children of their own, and those children had grandchildren, and those grandchildren grew old and died. The year 2847 became history, then legend, then something taught in schools that young people half listened to before returning to their games and dreams. But something strange had happened to humanity in those 3 centuries. The Vethrani Remembrance Act had not faded like other laws. It had grown stronger. Every year, on the anniversary of the Tau Ceti rescue, humans across the galaxy observed a moment of silence. Ships dimmed their lights. Stations went quiet. And somewhere, in every human settlement, someone read the names aloud. All 347 of them. The year was now 3147. And Ambassador Yuki Tanaka was traveling to a place few humans had ever seen, the Vethrani homeworld. Yuki was 63 years old. With gray hair she kept short and practical, and eyes that had seen too much suffering to be easily impressed. She had spent 40 years in the diplomatic service, negotiating with species that considered humans barely worth noticing. She had learned patience. She had learned humility, but she had also learned something that other species found puzzling. She had learned to remember. Her grandmother had been born on Tau Ceti III, in a small city near the northern ice caps. Her grandmother had been 12 years old when the Kepler collapse happened. She had told Yuki stories about that day, stories about the sky turning strange colors, about the ground shaking, about her mother holding her close and weeping because they thought they were going to die. And then the Vethrani had come, and the sky had filled with impossible light, and somehow, impossibly, they had lived. Yuki's grandmother had named her first daughter Velthan after the high anchor who had saved them. That daughter, Yuki's mother, had done the same. The name had passed through their family like a sacred inheritance. The Vethrani homeworld was beautiful and sad. Once, it had been the center of a mighty civilization. Now, it felt like a museum slowly crumbling to dust. The cities were half empty. The great towers that had reached toward the stars now stood dark and silent. The Vethrani themselves moved through their world like ghosts, ancient beings who had outlived their purpose and were simply waiting for the end. Their population had been declining for millennia. Their technology, while still advanced beyond human understanding, was degrading. They had forgotten how to build new anchor ships. They had forgotten many things. And the galaxy, which had once respected them, now saw them as relics old and weak and ripe for the taking. The Dominion of the Spire had made its intentions clear. They were a new power, aggressive and hungry, led by a species called the Keth that believed the strong had the right to take from the weak. They had already conquered a dozen minor civilizations. Now they were looking at Vethrani space with hungry eyes. Yuki's shuttle landed at the edge of an ancient city. She was met by a small delegation of Vethrani tall, thin beings whose blue skin had faded to pale gray with age. They looked at her with polite confusion. Why was a human here? What could humanity possibly want? She was brought before the Elder Council, 7 ancient Vethrani who governed what remained of their civilization. They sat in a chamber that had once been magnificent, with walls that still showed traces of crystallized light. Now it felt hollow and empty, like a tomb waiting for its occupants. Ambassador Tanaka, the eldest of them, said. His name was Velthos, and he was over 4,000 years old. His voice was thin and tired. We are honored by your visit, though we confess we do not understand its purpose. Humanity has no treaties with us, no trade agreements. We have had no contact with your species in quite some time. Yuki stood before them. She had prepared many speeches, many diplomatic phrases. But looking at these ancient fading beings, she found she could not use them. Instead, she reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, warm book. It was handwritten, the pages yellow with age, the binding held together with careful repairs made over generations. 300 years ago, she said, High Anchor Velthan of the Vethrani Concordance came to the Tau Ceti system. He brought 3 anchor ships and 347 crew members. They found 80 million humans facing death. They did not know us. They owed us nothing. But they saved us anyway, and 347 of them died doing it. The elders shifted uncomfortably. Velthus's eyes flickered with something surprise, perhaps, or the distant echo of memory. That was a long time ago, he said slowly. We had nearly forgotten. Yuki opened the book. The first name was Anchor Master Valindra. She was 712 years old. She had 3 children and 12 grandchildren. She operated the primary stabilization array on anchor ship Luminos, and when the ship's systems began to fail, she refused to evacuate. She stayed at her post until the end. The chamber had gone very still. The second name was Navigator Tholmok. He was only 203 young by your standards. He had recently bonded with his partner. He was planning to apply for a position on a research vessel. He died rerouting power to the sealing array when the secondary systems failed. Yuki continued reading. Name after name. Life after life. Details that no one should have remembered, that no one in the galaxy had remembered, except for humans. The elders listened in growing shock. Some of them began to weep, though Yuki had been told the Vethrani rarely showed such emotion. When she finished, the chamber was silent for a long moment. Finally, Veltos spoke, and his voice was no longer tired. It was thick with feeling that Yuki could not quite identify. "How?" he whispered. "How do you know these things? We ourselves have lost most of these records." Yuki closed the book gently. "Because we wrote them down. Because we taught them to our children, and they taught them to their children. Because 300 years ago, your people gave us everything, and we swore we would never forget." She stepped forward and placed the book on the table before the elders. "The dominion of the Spire is coming," she said. "They think you are old and weak and alone. They think no one will stand with you. But they are wrong. We have not forgotten what you did for us. We will never forget. And we are here to begin repaying what we owe." Velthus stared at her. "Ambassador, humanity is not a major power. The Spire will crush you if you stand against them. This is not your fight." Yuki smiled. It was not a diplomatic smile. It was the smile of a woman whose grandmother had lived because of Vethrani sacrifice, whose mother bore a Vethrani name, whose entire civilization had been shaped by a debt 3 centuries old. "With respect, Elder," she said, "it has always been our fight. We were simply waiting for the chance to join it." The message went out that night. Across human space, ships began to move. Fleets assembled. Resources were gathered. The galaxy watched in confusion as humanity prepared for a war that was not theirs. They did not understand. They could not understand. But they would learn. Humanity always repaid its debts. Commander Vorik of the Dominion Spire stood on the bridge of his flagship, the crushing tide, and watched the tactical display with growing irritation. The Vethrani border systems lay before him like ripe fruit waiting to be picked. His fleet of 200 warships was more than enough to crush any resistance the ancient species could offer. The conquest would be quick, clean, and profitable. Then the sensors detected something strange. "Commander," his tactical officer said, confusion in his voice. "We are detecting a large number of vessels entering the system. Vethrani reinforcements?" Vorik asked, not particularly concerned. The Vethrani barely had 50 functional warships left. "No, Commander. They are human." Vorik turned sharply. "Human? How many?" The tactical officer was silent for a moment, checking and rechecking his readings. When he spoke again, his voice had changed. The confusion was still there, but now it was mixed with something else. Something that sounded almost like fear. "All of them, Commander." The united human fleet emerged from faster-than-light travel, like a storm breaking over calm waters. There were carriers and battleships, destroyers and cruisers, support vessels and medical ships. There were old ships that should have been retired and new ships that had been rushed from the construction yards before they were fully complete. There were civilian vessels that had been hastily armed and converted. There were private yachts whose wealthy owners had volunteered for service. Every warship humanity possessed. Every vessel that could carry a weapon. 437 ships in total humanity's entire military might, gathered in one place for the first time in history. Vorik stared at the display. His mind could not process what he was seeing. "This is insane," he muttered. "They have left their own space completely undefended. If we wished, we could bypass them entirely and strike at their homeworld." "Perhaps that is what they expect us to do, Commander," his advisor suggested. "Perhaps this is a bluff." But even as the words were spoken, they both knew it was not a bluff. The human fleet was moving into defensive positions around Vethrani space, arranging themselves in formations designed not for attack, but for protection. They were not here to threaten. They were here to shield. Varric opened a communication channel. The face that appeared on his screen was human, a middle-aged woman with dark skin and eyes that held absolutely no fear. "I am Commander Varric of the Dominion Spire," he said. "You are interfering in matters that do not concern your species. Withdraw your fleet immediately, or we will consider this an act of war." The woman smiled slightly. "I am Admiral Sarah Okonkwo of the United Human Fleet. We will not be withdrawing, Commander. These systems are under our protection." "Your protection?" Varric almost laughed. "The Vethrani are not your allies. You have no treaties with them. You have no economic interests here. Why would you sacrifice your entire military for a dying species that offers you nothing?" Admiral Okonkwo's smile faded. Her voice became quiet and hard. 300 years ago, she said, the Vethrani saved 80 million of our people. They asked for nothing in return. They expected nothing. But we remember, Commander. We wrote their names on monuments. We taught their story to our children. We made their sacrifice part of who we are. And now it is time to repay that debt. Varric shook his head in disbelief. "This is foolishness. You will weaken your civilization for generations. The cost of this war—" "I know the cost," the Admiral interrupted. "I know exactly what we are risking. But you do not understand humans, Commander. We do not calculate debts on balance sheets. We do not weigh lives against profit. When someone saves us, we remember. And we repay, always." The communication ended. The first battle of the Vethrani border began 3 hours later. Varric had hoped the humans would break when they saw Spire warships actually advancing. He had been told humans were a young species, inexperienced in real war, easily frightened. He had been told wrong. The human ships did not break. They did not retreat when outgunned. They fought with a ferocity that Varric had never seen in all his years of conquest. When a Spire destroyer tried to slip past the defensive line to strike at a Vethrani station, 3 human frigates threw themselves in its path. 2 of them were destroyed. The third, badly damaged and burning, continued fighting until it had rammed the destroyer and torn it apart. Varric watched his casualty. Reports climbed higher and higher. He had expected to lose perhaps 20 ships in the entire campaign. In the first battle alone, he lost 38. The humans lost more 52 vessels destroyed, many others damaged, but they did not seem to care. They treated every inch of Vethrani space as if it were their own homeworld. Why? Varric demanded of his intelligence officer. Why do they fight like this? What do they gain? His intelligence officer had spent days studying human behavior, human history, human culture. He had found something that disturbed him deeply. They call it debt, Commander. But it is not debt as we understand it. To them, the Vethrani sacrifice was not a transaction to be balanced. It was a gift. And humans believe that gifts must be returned many times over. They are not fighting for territory or resources. They are fighting because they believe they owe the Vethrani everything, and they will not stop until that debt is paid. But the math makes no sense, Varric insisted. The Vethrani saved 80 million humans. Even if we killed 80 million humans today, the debt would be equal. Why are they willing to lose more? The intelligence officer hesitated. I believe, Commander, that humans do not see it that way. To them, the value is not in the numbers. It is in the act itself. The Vethrani helped them when they were weak and helpless. That act, that choice to help without expecting return, is what humans are repaying. And they believe no sacrifice is too great to honor it. Varric sat in silence for a long moment. He had conquered many species, He had seen many strange behaviors. But this was something different. This was something his people had no word for. In the weeks that followed, the war continued. The Spire pushed forward, and the humans pushed back. Every system the Spire tried to take was defended with impossible determination. Human ships formed living shields around Vethrani stations. Human soldiers fought hand-to-hand in station corridors to protect Vethrani civilians they had never met. And slowly, impossibly, the tide began to turn. Not because humanity was winning the battles. They were losing more ships than the Spire in almost every engagement. But because the Spire had expected an easy conquest, and instead they had found a war. Their supply lines stretched thin. Their crews grew tired. Their commanders began to wonder if the Vethrani systems were worth the cost. And across the galaxy, other species began to watch. They saw a young, minor civilization throwing itself into fire to protect an old, dying one. They saw humans dying for a debt that should have been forgotten centuries ago. They saw something they had not seen in a very long time. They saw loyalty. True loyalty. The kind that did not calculate cost and benefit. And some of them began to remember their own debts. The war was 3 months old, and humanity was bleeding. Admiral Sarah Okonkwo sat in her command chair, staring at reports that told a story of slow destruction. The United Human Fleet had lost 123 ships. 17,000 human lives gone. The industrial capacity of 3 major colonies had been redirected entirely to military production, and economists predicted it would take 50 years to recover. Human children were growing up without parents. Human families were mourning losses that could never be replaced. And yet, they kept fighting. Back on Earth, Sarah knew. There were protests. Some humans questioned the wisdom of spending so much for a species that was already dying. Politicians argued about resources and strategy. News reports showed the faces of the dead and asked if it was worth it. But the protests remained small. The politicians remained outvoted. And every week, new volunteers arrived at recruitment centers, ready to take the places of those who had fallen. They came from Earth and Mars, from Tau Ceti and Alpha Centauri, from every world where humans had built their lives. They came because their grandparents had taught them about the Vethrani, and their parents had taught them, and they had grown up knowing that some debts could never be forgotten. The Spire had not expected this. They had planned for a quick war, a few months at most. Now they were trapped in a conflict that was draining their own resources, and they could not understand why. During a temporary ceasefire, a Spire diplomat named Catherine was sent to negotiate. He met with Admiral Okonkwo aboard a neutral station, in a small room with bare walls and uncomfortable chairs. He studied the human across from him, a woman who looked tired beyond words, who had clearly not slept properly in weeks, but whose eyes still burned with quiet determination. "Admiral," Catherine said, "I must be honest with you. We do not understand your species. We have studied your history, your culture, your psychology. We have consulted experts from dozens of civilizations, and none of us can explain what you are doing." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "What is there to explain? We are defending our allies." "But they are not your allies," Catherine insisted. "You had no formal relationship with the Vethrani until this war began. You share no borders with them. You have no economic ties. The debt you speak of is 300 years old, from an event that most of your current population did not personally experience. By any rational calculation, the cost of this war far exceeds any benefit you could possibly receive." Sarah was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was calm and certain. "You're right that the math doesn't work. If you're counting ships and lives and money, we've already spent far more than the Vethrani ever gave us. But that's not how humans think about debts." She leaned forward. 300 years ago, we were nobody. a minor species with primitive technology and a few scattered colonies. We were dying, and no one in the galaxy had any reason to help us. But the Vethrani came anyway. They burned their sacred ships. They sacrificed their own people. Not because they would gain anything. Not because we could repay them. Simply because it was the right thing to do. That act, that choice to help when they could have looked away changed us. It became part of who we are as a species. We built monuments to remember it. We wrote laws to honor it. We raised our children to understand that kindness given freely is the most precious thing in the universe. And now we're returning that kindness, not because we have to, but because it's who we have become. Catherine shook his head slowly. You are willing to destroy your own civilization for this. Sentiment? If necessary, yes. Sarah smiled without warmth. But I don't think it will come to that. You see, we've learned something interesting over these past months. We're not the only ones who remember old bets. She activated a display screen. Points of light began appearing across a map of the galaxy, ships moving, fleets assembling, messages being sent. The Kethmari, Sarah said. 150 years ago, during their Great Famine, human traders delivered food supplies at cost, asking nothing in return. Yesterday, they announced they would be sending supply ships to support our war effort. Another light appeared. The Iloxi. 80 years ago, a human security team protected their diplomatic envoy during an assassination attempt. 3 of our people died saving their ambassador. Last week, the Iloxi Intelligence Service began sharing information about Spire military movements. More lights. More names. More stories. The Torval and Mayan Consortium. We helped them negotiate fair prices when larger powers tried to exploit them. The Sarati Scientific Academy. We shared medical research that helped cure a plague on their homeworld. The Merchant Coalition of Vex. We honored contracts when breaking them would have been more profitable. The map was filling with light now. Dozens of species. Hundreds of small debts, small kindnesses, small choices that humans had made over centuries of interstellar contact. None of these debts are large, Sarah said. None of them would make you change your strategic calculations. But they add up. And now, one by one, these species are remembering what humans did for them. They're watching us sacrifice everything to honor our own obligations. And they're asking themselves if they want to be the kind of civilization that forgets or the kind that remembers. Catherine stared at the display. He had known about some of these developments, but seeing them all together was something else entirely. The dominion of the Spire was used to conquest, to forcing smaller powers to submit through fear. They had no experience with this kind of opposition, an alliance not of treaties and threats, but of remembered kindnesses. This changes nothing, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. We have the largest military in this sector. We can still, can you? Sarah interrupted. Can you fight a war against an enemy that keeps growing? Against an alliance held together not by politics, but by something you cannot buy or threaten or destroy. We are not fighting you for territory or power, Catherine. We are fighting because we owe a debt, and we will pay it no matter the cost. Can you say the same? Will your soldiers die for conquest the way ours die for gratitude? She stood and walked to the window, looking out at the stars. The Vethrani saved us when we were weak. Now we are protecting them while they are weak. And when this is over, when the galaxy looks back on this war, they will see something new. They will see that kindness matters, that debts are remembered, that the universe does not have to be cruel and cold and uncaring. She turned back to face him. That's what we're fighting for, Catherine. Not just the Vethrani, not just ourselves. We're fighting to prove that loyalty means something, that honor means something, that the choice to help someone weaker than you is never wasted, even if it takes 300 years for the universe to balance the scales. Catherine left the negotiation with nothing decided. But as he returned to his fleet, he found himself thinking about things he had never considered before. He thought about the history of his own people who had helped them. Who had they helped? What debts did they owe, and what debts were owed to them? He had no answers. The Spire had never kept track of such things. And somehow, for the first time, that felt like a weakness. The Spire High Command made its decision on a cold morning in the 6th month of the war. They would end this conflict with a single overwhelming strike. Every available warship would assault the Vethrani homeworld directly. Cut off the head, and the body would die. It was crude strategy, but it would be effective. Admiral Miriam Okafor had known this moment was coming. She had studied Spire tactics for months. She understood how they thought. They were predators, and predators always went for the throat when cornered. The human fleet was spread thin across Vethrani space, defending dozens of systems. The Vethrani homeworld itself was protected by only a fraction of their forces. When her intelligence officers brought her the news 600 Spire warships approaching a massive formation, she did not panic. She simply looked at the numbers, looked at her options, and made her choice. She ordered the fleet to converge. Every human ship that could reach the homeworld in time would be there. The systems they left behind would be vulnerable, but that no longer mattered. This was where the war would end. The human fleet arrived first, but only barely. 173 ships against 600. The math was terrible. But Miriam had not come to win by the numbers. She had come to buy time. All ships, she broadcast to her fleet. I will not lie to you. We are outnumbered. Many of us will not survive this day. But every minute we hold this line is another minute for Vethrani civilians to evacuate. Every ship we destroy is one that cannot threaten their children. We are not here to win. We are here to give our friends a chance to live. She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was soft but steady. 300 years ago, strangers gave everything to save our people. Today, we return that gift. Today, we show the galaxy what human loyalty truly means. All hands, prepare for engagement. The Battle of the Vethrani homeworld began at dawn, though dawn meant nothing in the black between stars. The Spire fleet came in waves, confident in their numbers. The human fleet did not retreat. They formed a living wall between the enemy and the ancient world they had sworn to protect. The first hour was chaos. Ships burned and died on both sides. Human destroyers threw themselves at Spire battleships, sacrificing themselves to create openings for others. Carriers launched fighters that swarmed like angry insects, trading one pilot's life for every enemy turret they destroyed. Miriam watched from the bridge of her flagship, the Remembrance, named like so many human ships for the debt they were repaying. She gave orders calmly, shifting forces where they were needed, plugging gaps as they appeared. But she knew the truth. They were losing. Slowly, inevitably, the Spire was grinding them down. By the third hour, the human fleet had been reduced by half. 86 ships remained, many of them damaged. The Spire had lost nearly 200 vessels, a testament to human ferocity, but they still had more than enough to finish the job. Miriam received a communication from the Vethrani Elder Council. Velthos himself appeared on her screen, his ancient face wet with tears. "Admiral," he said, "you have done more than we ever could have asked. More than we ever deserved. Please, save your remaining ships. We will face our end with dignity." Miriam shook her head. "With respect, Elder, we're not leaving. The debt isn't paid yet." "The debt was paid 100 times over," Velthos whispered. "We saved your people once. You have died for us thousands of times. There is nothing left to owe." Miriam smiled a genuine smile, despite everything. That's not how we see it. The Vethrani didn't save us because they expected payment. They saved us because it was right. And we're not protecting you because we're counting lives. We're protecting you because you're our friends. Because you deserve to live. Because 300 years ago, you taught us what true kindness looks like, and we're still learning from that lesson. The communication ended. Miriam turned back to the battle dot, and then something changed. New signals appeared on the sensors. Ships emerging from faster-than-light travel. But they were not Spire reinforcements. The Kethmari fleet arrived first 70 warships, all but functional, crewed by beings who remembered human kindness during their darkest hour. Then the Iloxi, with their sleek interceptors and electronic warfare capabilities. Then the Torvalans in mining vessels hastily converted to combat. Then the Sarati, whose medical ships would save thousands of lives in the hours to come. More and more. Species that owed humanity small debts. Species that owed them nothing but wanted to stand with those who stood for loyalty. Species that had watched the war and decided they wanted to be part of something better. Miriam watched her tactical display fill with friendly signals. And for the first time in months, she felt something other than grim determination. She felt hope. The Spire fleet hesitated. They had planned for humans. They had not planned for this. Commander Vorik, watching from his flagship, understood what he was seeing. This was not just a battle anymore. This was a moment. A turning point. The galaxy was choosing sides, and it was choosing the humans, not because of treaties or threats, but because humans had shown them something worth choosing. He gave the order to retreat. The victory was not total. Many Spire ships escaped. The war would continue for another year before a final peace was signed. But everyone who was there knew that the Battle of the Vethrani homeworld was when everything changed. 40% of the human fleet had been destroyed. Admiral Miriam Okafor's flagship was among the casualties. She had rammed it into a Spire carrier that was about to fire on the Vethrani planetary shield generators. She had saved millions of lives with her death. 100 years later, on the anniversary of the battle, a young Vethrani historian named Valindran, named for an ancestor who had died saving, Tau Seti invited a human veteran to visit the Vethrani homeworld. The veteran was old now, her hair white and her movement slow. Her name was Elena Chan, and her grandmother had served on the Remembrance. She had grown up hearing stories about the war, about the debts humans paid and the friends they made. Elena carried a warm book of family heirloom, handwritten pages recording the names of every Vethrani who had died in 2847. Her grandmother had received it from her mother, who had received it from her mother, going back generations to a young captain named Elena Vasquez, who had stood before a dying alien and asked, "Why did you save us? Why do you still carry that book?" Valindra asked, "The war is over. The debt is paid. Our peoples are allies now, bound by treaties and trade and shared history. Why do you still remember the old names?" Elena looked at the book in her hands. It was falling apart, really. The pages were fragile. The binding was held together by careful repairs made over centuries. But every name was still legible. Every life still honored. "Because the galaxy is very old," she said, "and most species forget. They forget kindnesses and cruelties alike. They let old debts fade and old friends drift away. They make alliances when convenient and break them when profitable. And maybe that's practical. Maybe that's sensible." She looked up at the Vethrani historian, and her eyes held the same quiet fire that had burned in her ancestors. "But humans are young, and we remember everything. Every kindness done to us. Every sacrifice made on our behalf. Every name of everyone who ever helped us when we were weak. We write them down. We teach them to our children. We make them part of our laws and our monuments and our very identity." She smiled. The Vethrani taught us that 300 years ago. They taught us that kindness doesn't need a reason, that helping others is its own reward. But they also taught us something else, something I don't think they intended. They taught us that kindness remembered is kindness multiplied. That debts repaid create new debts, which create new bonds, which create new friendships. Elena handed the book to Valindra. The young historian took it carefully, as if it were the most precious thing in the universe. "Keep it," Elena said. "Keep it and remember. Remember what your ancestors did for mine. Remember what mine did for yours. And when the next species needs help, when the next civilization faces extinction, remember that the favor you do them today may save your grandchildren 100 years from now." She turned to look out the window at the ancient Vethrani city that still stood because humans had decided to stand with it. "That's the lesson we learned from you. That's the favor we return. Not just ships and soldiers and sacrifice, but the idea that kindness matters. That loyalty is worth dying for. That the universe doesn't have to be cold and cruel if enough of us choose to make it warm." Valindra clutched the book to her chest. Somewhere in its pages was the name of her ancestor, Anchor Master Valindra, who had died saving humans she would never meet. And now, 300 years later, that sacrifice had come full circle. The Vethrani still lived. The humans still remembered. And the galaxy was a little bit brighter because of a single act of kindness that refused to be forgotten. In the end, that was the true favor humanity returned. Not victory, not survival, hope.